August 1944, somewhere in western France, and the German High Command was making a fatal mistake. Their intelligence reports painted a comforting picture, one that told them exactly what they wanted to hear. American soldiers were soft, their officers too dependent on technology, and after the brutal fighting in Normandy, they must be exhausted and ready to break. It was the kind of thinking that costs wars. But while German generals sat in their headquarters reading these reassuring reports, Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilots were seeing something completely different from their cockpits high above the French countryside. Flying over the roads south of Avranches, they captured footage that should have sent shockwaves through German command. Thousands of American vehicles stretched across the landscape, long columns of trucks rolling forward with mechanical precision, hundreds of tanks moving in coordinated formations. When these photographs reached German headquarters, the response was almost casual, dismissive even. Officers chuckled among themselves. "The Americans are slow," they said. "They are too heavy, too dependent on their machines. We will strike, and they will crumble like they always do." It was the confidence of men who had conquered most of Europe, men who believed their own legends. But down on the ground, where wars are actually won and lost, reality was painting a very different picture. The U.S. 4th Armored Division, commanded by General John S. Wood, was advancing with a precision and speed that would have impressed even the most demanding tactical observer. This was not the slow, grinding advance that German intelligence had predicted. This was something else entirely, something that represented the evolution of American military doctrine into its most lethal form. Veterans who fought in those units still remember the discipline, the sense of purpose, the way every man understood his role in the larger machine. These were soldiers who acted on initiative, who did not wait for orders when the situation was clear, who moved relentlessly forward because that was what the mission required. This was the classic American approach to warfare, and it was about to shock the German military to its core. The philosophy was simple but devastatingly effective. Mobility over everything else. Rapid maneuvers that kept the enemy guessing. Constant, unrelenting pressure that never gave them time to breathe or regroup. Against them stood what remained of Germany's elite formations. The Panzer Lehr division, once considered one of the Wehrmacht's finest armored units, a division that had been built from the ground up with the best equipment and the most experienced instructors. Alongside them fought elements of the Second Panzer Division, another formation with a fearsome reputation earned through years of brutal combat. These were not green recruits or second-rate troops. These were battle-hardened veterans who had fought across multiple fronts, men who knew their craft. But here is what German command failed to understand, what their confident reports and dismissive laughter completely missed. There was a massive gulf between what the Germans expected the Americans to do and what the Americans were actually capable of doing. American columns were not moving like a slow, disorganized mob of trucks and tanks. They were moving like a precisely calibrated machine operating at high speed. Everything had changed. New logistical systems meant supplies kept pace with the advance. Powerful tow vehicles meant broken equipment did not slow the column. Mobile repair units meant minor damage was fixed in hours, not days. Junior officers had been trained to take initiative, to make decisions on the ground without waiting for approval from higher command. All of this combined to create an army that moved faster than the Germans thought possible, faster than German doctrine could handle. It was a decisive advantage, the kind that determines the outcome of entire campaigns. The lessons from the fighting in Normandy during July and August had been learned and applied with brutal efficiency. Speed could replace armor thickness. Initiative could overcome years of experience. Aggressive maneuver could achieve what frontal assault could not. When German forces prepared their defensive positions expecting a standard American attack, something they thought they understood. The 4th Armored Division was already executing a flanking maneuver that German headquarters had not even considered possible. The next 2 days would change everything. As one captured German officer would later tell his interrogators, his voice heavy with the weight of realization, "We thought we understood the Americans. We were wrong." The morning of August 27th brought a brutal awakening for German forces in the field. Forward units of Panzer Lehr had positioned themselves expecting standard American procedure, the kind of attack they had faced before. First would come the artillery barrage, hours of shelling to soften defenses. Then the slow infantry advance, methodical and predictable. Finally, the tanks would roll forward in support. This had been the pattern in Sicily, in Italy, in the early weeks of fighting in Normandy. German officers had studied these battles, written reports, developed counter-tactics. They thought they knew what was coming. Instead, they heard something that sent a chill down experienced spines. A continuous roar of engines, not distant but close and getting closer. Rapid flanking movements hitting positions that should have been secure. Reconnaissance units engaging but not committing, probing the defenses, forcing German positions to reveal themselves and their firing positions. It was a tactical nightmare unfolding in real time. Within minutes, not hours, the main American strike hit with overwhelming force. Veterans who survived call it a textbook example of decisive maneuver warfare executed to perfection. The American Shermans and light tanks did not charge straight into German guns the way doctrine said they would. Instead, they moved in sweeping arcs around German positions, finding and exploiting the weak flanks where anti-tank defenses were thin and fuel shortages had left German armor unable to reposition. German radio communications erupted with panic, voices sharp with stress and confusion. Panzer commanders were reporting unexpected flanking attacks from directions that should have been impossible. They described rapid American movements that our doctrine cannot account for, that our training did not prepare us for. For proud German officers who had built their careers on tactical superiority, this was more than a military setback. It was a blow to their fundamental understanding of warfare. Panzer Lehr had been an elite formation, fully motorized with highly trained crews who represented the best the Wehrmacht could produce. But by August 1944, after years of grinding warfare and Allied bombing campaigns, it had become a shadow of its former strength. Equipment was worn out, fuel was critically short, experienced crews had been killed and replaced with less trained men. The Americans sensed this weakness like predators sensing injured prey. Every intersection they captured, every German transport they destroyed, every bridge they secured opened new options for maneuver, new ways to keep the pressure on. By midday, German unit commanders were reporting to headquarters with voices that betrayed their growing fear. The battle was not unfolding according to plan. Nothing was happening the way it should. A captured officer would later recall with striking clarity, "We expected a slow frontal advance, the kind we had defended against many times before. Instead, we faced what felt like a lightning strike, fast and overwhelming and utterly devastating." But that lightning strike on the morning of August 27th was only the beginning of what would become one of the most complete tactical defeats suffered by German elite units in the entire Western campaign. The most humiliating moments, the final collapse of units that had once been considered virtually invincible, would come by evening. By the evening of August 27th, German headquarters was drowning in chaos. Telephone lines were overloaded with desperate calls from unit commanders trying to report their situations. Radio communications were intermittent, crackling with static and overlapping voices. Reports coming in were fragmented, often contradictory, sometimes making no tactical sense at all. But through all the confusion, one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear. The Americans were advancing too fast, far too fast for German officers to assess the battlefield and formulate responses. In the afternoon, the 4th Armored Division executed a maneuver that military historians would later study as a textbook example of mobile warfare done right. Rather than storming panzer positions head-on, which would have been costly and slow, American tanks and mechanized infantry struck the left flank with devastating precision. German reaction was delayed, fatally so. Soldiers of the Second Panzer Division, exhausted from weeks of continuous combat and poorly supplied due to Allied air superiority, tried desperately to establish an improvised defensive line at a critical crossroads. By the time they got organized, American forces were already there, moving faster than German doctrine anticipated, faster than seemed humanly possible. The main reason for German shock was the fundamental nature of what they were experiencing. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, had been Germany's signature innovation, the tactical approach that had conquered Poland and France and driven deep into Russia. It was supposed to be their advantage, their edge over slower-moving enemies. But now, in the summer of 1944, Americans were conducting a lightning offensive in the German style, only they were doing it faster and with better logistics and more flexible command structure. A particularly dramatic episode occurred at the small village of Tessie, a place that would have been forgotten by history if not for what happened there. German reports indicated a single infantry company held the village with a few anti-tank positions for support. Standard procedure would have been to assault the village, clear it building by building, a costly and time-consuming process. Instead, American forces did something that demonstrated their tactical evolution. They bypassed the strong points entirely, flanked the village from unexpected directions, and neutralized all organized resistance within 20 minutes. By late evening, as the summer sun set over the French countryside, German generals were finally beginning to grasp the severity of their situation. Panzer Lehr was losing combat units rapidly, bleeding strength with each passing hour. The Second Panzer Division reported that it could not move its remaining tanks due to critical fuel shortages, that they were essentially stationary targets waiting to be destroyed. American forces were exploiting every advantage with ruthless efficiency. Supply columns kept pace with the advancing tanks, a logistical achievement that German forces could no longer match. Roads were cleared by engineer units working with speed and skill. Repair teams worked around the clock, keeping the American war machine running at full capacity. General John Wood was applying the principles of breakthrough and exploitation in real time, always keeping German forces one step behind, never giving them time to stabilize a defensive line. Prisoners captured that night told a story of exhaustion and disbelief. One officer, still shocked by the speed of his unit's collapse, admitted to his captors with obvious frustration, "We did not understand where you were coming from, how you were moving so fast. You moved faster than we could even report your movements to headquarters." The psychological impact was proving as decisive as the tactical destruction. German troops were watching their elite units, formations that carried proud traditions and fearsome reputations, falling apart not because they lacked courage or fighting spirit, but simply because they could not keep up with the tempo of American operations. By midnight on August 27th, the 4th Armored Division had accomplished something remarkable. They had broken through 2 German defensive lines in a single day, rendering elaborate German defensive plans obsolete before they could even be fully implemented. The final blow, the complete destruction of organized German resistance in the sector, would come the next morning. The morning of August 28th revealed a reality that German headquarters could no longer deny or rationalize away. Reports flooding in included a word that rarely appeared in German military communications, a word that carried enormous weight. Überraschung. Complete surprise. Total tactical shock. Americans began the day with a maneuver that would later be studied in military academies as a classic example of how to exploit an enemy's retreat options. The 4th Armored Division moved to cut a key road that was being used by both Panzer Lehr and the Second Panzer Division for resupply and potential withdrawal. For German commanders receiving this news, the implications were catastrophic. This was not just losing a battle or even a sector. This was equivalent to losing an entire front, to having elite mechanized units trapped with no viable escape route. These formations, which had cost enormous resources to create and train, found themselves caught in a tactical vice. American suppressive artillery fire, accurate and relentless, prevented any attempts at regrouping or organizing a coordinated breakout. American tanks occupied the high ground overlooking critical crossroads and withdrawal routes, turning every German movement into a potential death sentence. The most dramatic moment of the entire engagement occurred at a place called Artonne Pont. The remaining German tanks, recognizing that staying in place meant certain destruction, attempted a desperate breakout. It was a bold move, the kind of aggressive action that had succeeded for German forces in earlier years of the war. But the Americans were ready. Sherman tanks advanced in tactical groups of 3, mutually supporting each other with overlapping fields of fire. Mechanized infantry flanked German tank crews from forest edges, using terrain that German forces had not properly secured. The assault, launched with determination and courage, collapsed within 40 minutes. By midday, Americans were counting dozens of abandoned German vehicles littering the roads and fields, hundreds of prisoners being processed, equipment captured intact because German crews had no time to destroy it properly. A panzer officer brought into captivity, still processing what had happened to his unit, admitted something that must have been painful for a professional soldier to say. Your tanks did not stop. We expected pauses, moments when you would consolidate and we could counterattack. There were none. You just kept coming. By afternoon, German command was attempting to organize some kind of orderly retreat to salvage what could be saved from the disaster. But every potential route was blocked. American reconnaissance units were moving so quickly that Germans would later say, with a mixture of respect and frustration, they appeared in positions before we could even predict where they would be. It was like fighting an enemy that could read minds. By the evening of August 28th, both elite German divisions had effectively ceased to exist as organized combat units capable of sustained operations. Panzer Lehr had lost most of its remaining vehicles and heavy equipment. The Second Panzer Division had fragmented into small, disconnected groups trying to escape encirclement. In stark contrast, American forces were advancing with confidence and professional competence, their units intact and combat effective. The 4th Armored Division had accomplished something that German headquarters had deemed completely impossible just 72 hours earlier. Within 48 hours of sustained operations, they had completely defeated 2 elite German formations, units that carried proud traditions and fearsome reputations. They had outpaced them strategically, outmaneuvered them tactically, and broken them psychologically. A captured German officer, during his interrogation by Allied intelligence, provided what might be the most telling assessment of the entire operation. His words were recorded and later appeared in official reports. "We thought Americans were slow," he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard lessons learned. "We thought you could not advance without pauses, without time to resupply and reorganize. But you achieved what we accomplished in 1940 during our invasion of France. Only you did it faster and against prepared defenders who knew you were coming." This operation became an early and striking example of a fundamental shift in military capabilities. The United States Army had mastered mobile warfare, as well as, and in some critical ways better than, German forces that had once been considered virtually unbeatable. For American veterans who fought in those units, this victory remains a powerful testament to courage, discipline, and individual initiative. For German commanders, it was a lesson learned too late to change the outcome of the war.